Dr. Herman has over 30 years of experience in education, which includes teaching and administrative duties at St. Mary's University in Winona, Winona State University, and Augusta Tana College in Sioux Falls, South Dakota. Prior to that, he was an elementary school teacher and principal in South Dakota. Since 2004, Bob has owned and operated the Buffalo City Food Mart and currently lives in Buffalo City. With that, I'll introduce Bob to come forward. Thank you.
I have an outline. I do this. Okay, if you do that, I'll take one. You go ahead. Thank you very much. Can you hear me? I had 5 sons. No, I still have 5 sons. And there's one thing about boys. They don't listen unless you talk loud. So if I don't talk loud enough, I won't need it.
Okay.
Because I can hear me.
Okay.
And if you can hear me, we're okay. We're good to go. Sure, thank you. I don't like being behind the podium, so I walk around a lot, and it drives people who are videotaping me nuts. Okay? And that's okay because I don't care. What you're getting right now is an outline of my discussion. Okay? And all it is an outline. So if you have a pen or a pencil, or if you want to scribble something down, it's yours to take home. I'm not going to charge you for it. There's no postage due at the end of the meeting. So just feel free to do that. You can skim through it now. But I'm going to go through it, and I'm going to discuss a lot of the stuff there. And in fact, when we get to point 4, that is strictly dedicated to Wisconsin and some of the highlights of Wisconsin and Wisconsin soldiers and service of their politicians, such as, and I'm just going to give you a little tidbit right now, how many governors were there in Wisconsin during the Civil War? It's the only state in the whole Union who had that many governors. Any idea? 1, 2, you read it already,
4?
didn't you? Yes, 4. And in fact, the term 100-day wonder will come from a Wisconsin governor who was only in office 100 days. Okay, I'll cover that later, but I want you to be thinking about that. Okay, my discussion starts with equipment. And Gary's, and I really encourage you to look over there and to experience that. But before I do anything else, I don't think it's fair for me to come in as Mr. Big Expert without you really knowing me. Now, yes, 30 years of education. That's how. Wow, you are really an old guy, aren't you? Well, yeah, I guess you could say that. My kids remind me of that all the time. However, I get my revenge on them. My second son just turned 30. Oh, is he having a hard time with that? Dad, I never thought I'd make it past 18. I said, yeah, and I know that too. Believe me, there were times. More importantly is I am a teacher. I have always been a teacher, not only in practice, but at heart. I love working with people who want to learn. People who are capable of learning. And so you need to understand where I'm coming from. 5 years a classroom teacher, 9 years an elementary middle school principal who built and developed curriculums that help kids learn. Okay? And then I moved on, got my doctorate, and got really blessed because I got to teach social studies to college students. Whoa! I started at a private school, Augustana College in Sioux Falls. I was there 3 years. I loved it. I had a great time, but I was asked to apply for a job at Winona State, which at the time was a premier education institution, and I still believe it is. It's just that I'm not there. And I came and was offered a job, and I taught science, social studies, math, reading. Yes, I did them all because I want to teach students, and that's what I did, was I trained teachers how to teach throwing out textbooks and workbooks. I think they're the curse of mankind. You've got to get your kids, your students, involved. The way to get them involved is let them feel, let them see, let them experience history. Someone can tell you that the rifle was a smooth bore. Someone can tell you it fired about 30 yards and then that ball dropped off big time. And someone can tell you all of that. And they can tell you that these Pennsylvania Dutch, German, said, I hate this gun. And you can turn around and then you look it up and you find out they went and they rifled the barrels of their guns. Because they had gunsmiths right in their unit. And they became so accurate that no longer did they have to charge up there and 30 yards away and fire at each other. They could sit back 300 yards and shoot the eyes out of a crow. And all they did was rifle the barrel. Whoa, 300, do you know how far that is? Stop and think about that. Because that's only part of some of the weaponry they used. And that's the first point, is equipment. I'm going to talk about that. But some of the other things with that particular weapon was its weight. And I can't tell you what it's like to carry that until you pick it up and you feel it and you understand. These soldiers had to march with these things on. Somebody didn't come behind them in a truck and go, okay, everybody line up in the back and pick up your weapon. And they trained with the weapon. And the government didn't give them a whole lot. They gave them one, and that's only after they were really good with it. Yes, many times they trained with broomsticks and chunks of wood and so on. And in fact, what's really interesting, just a little trivia about Wisconsin, is the Norwegians. What was the main occupation of most Norwegians coming here, living in Wisconsin? First, foremost, what? Lumberjacks. White pine. Think of Wisconsin. Absolutely. They hated taking a piece of wood and carrying it around. So what did they do? They took their axes. If you're not going to give me a gun, I'll take my axe. And they did. You didn't want to get a Norwegian man. No, no, no. Bad thing, bad thing, bad thing. Okay. My history is love teaching. I love inspiring people to learn. So you understand where I'm coming from. And I don't feel a bit bashful if you want to come up here and if you want to look at things. I'm going to encourage you to do so all throughout. I'm going to point out some books, especially one that's really good. Okay, if you want to follow along in your outline, this thing is on, isn't it? Yeah. Okay. We'll put it over here. It's driving me crazy. It's everywhere. No, well, you do whatever you want to. Notice that I talk about equipment, I go to the standard infantry rifle. And I'm going to pass this around. It's a plaything, it's a plastic. Believe me, you won't be expelled from the building. Even though, yes, I was a principal. I think that's silly that they expel someone for playing with a toy gun, but okay. I want you to look at it, understand it, but I really, 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 really encourage you to take a look at the one over there. Okay, smooth bore, 30 yards. Thing weighs about 12 pounds. 12 pounds isn't bad. March sometime with 12 pounds. Not bad. March sometime with 64 pounds of field equipment in a leather backpack. March sometime with a 12-pound weapon, a belt that weighed about 16 pounds, a 64-pound backpack, and now add in, most of your training and marching is done in the summer, and by the way, their summers were no different than they are now. They weren't 60 degrees and air-conditioned comfort in your Buick LeSabre. And in a wool uniform. Oh, geez, you gotta be kidding. That you got, and unless you were fording the stream, it didn't get washed too often. Now, what do you think it was like being a Union soldier when you were carrying nearly 100 pounds of equipment? Heavy, awkward, and that's the way it was. The weapon is described here. I'm not going to tell you a whole lot about it. The bayonet, you can see it right over there. It's 18 inches. It's a nasty. It's meant for hand-to-hand combat. If you got close enough, and what you'll see in the diagrams and the soldiers that I've got up here, is it was close hand-to-hand combat. You didn't stand 60 yards off, you didn't stand 500 yards off, you looked the person in the eye, and they looked you in the eye. Why? Because that's the way wars were fought. Is it pretty? No. Is it meant to hurt? Yes. Tremendous technology is made during the war, but they are brutal weapons. Because you don't die when you get stuck with a bayonet. Well, not right away. And it hurts. And that's saying it very lightly. It's a terrible, terrible way to die. Repeating rifle. And what's neat is very similar to the weapon here. And I'm not going to pick it up, I'm going to let you do that. Very similar to this one, except for the cap firing mechanism. In 1862, the Union, by several companies, Sharps being one of them, that little company called Winchester, developed a 7-shot rifle. 7-shot? How'd they do that? It looked much like this. Much like that. Except you just pulled it back or you cocked it. Passed around. And by cocking it, you had bullets that were located in the base of the stock with a spring action, and one popped up, you could fire it, cock it, popped another one, fire it. It gave soldiers, in particular cavalry soldiers, and then very few, but some infantry units, the ability to fire 7 rounds continuous. And think about that. When you could fire 21 rounds, 21 shots. This was mine, isn't it? Is that yours? I left mine up there. I forget things. You could fire 21 rounds in a minute. The person, even an expert at loading a muzzleloader, will get 3 off. 21, 3. Huge, huge firepower. Advantage Union. Cavalries equipped themselves immediately in the north. The Southern cavalry would go out of their way to capture Union weapons, especially their rifles. They would manufacture their own kinds of firing, ammunition and so on for them, but they wanted those rifles. Huge, huge, important part of them. Now, another weapon, and you can look right down there, it talks about it, is the pistol. Now the pistol, and I'll just take one off one of the soldiers here. The pistol, and this is again just a toy, pistol as it's described right there, huge firing potential. Cap and ball started it, later cartridge, rim-firing cartridges were added towards the end of the war. But it gave them 6 shots. Now if you have one and you're shooting at me and you miss, I can miss 5 times and still get you. Stop and think about that. Because, and why don't you take a look at that and just pass it around. I want everyone to get a chance to see it. The pistol was never designed and this is the biggest fallacy of Hollywood, it's a quick draw, because the thing's heavy, it's awkward, it's long. What was it designed for, you know? What? No, they weren't accurate. You know what they were designed for? Honest. They were designed by cavalry officers prior to the Civil War, yes, and it was meant to lay between the ears of a horse as you rode and to fire. One hand on the reins, one hand on the pistol, you pull it back, you shoot. Pull it back, you shoot. You didn't have to advance the mechanism, it did that for you. It gave you 6 shots. When you're attacking infantry who have 1 shot, they might try and hit your horse. They're probably not going to hit you, but you've got 6 shots. Now you had to really train your horses. And when I say really train your horses to get used to that, what it really came down to was the horses had to be almost deaf.
Yep.
And if you shoot that thing off enough times right between their ears and they get used to it, they are deaf. Because they're not quite, they don't go pop. It's an explosion. But the pistol was designed to give added firepower to cavalry, and then officers were awarded one upon graduation. Not many used them. They would give them rather to their sergeant majors, because officers, generally speaking, were behind the lines because they knew what was going on up there, and they weren't going up there unless they had to. And so the sergeant major, he would be the one with 3 sergeant stripes and 3 bars, was the person in charge of the guys up front, and he would be given a pistol, and he would use it any way he could to get his troops to move forward and then to attack the enemy. So you need to understand some of those weapons as you go through that. Now where did I leave it? Over here? There, see? It's all the time. The sword. And I told someone before, I wanted you to understand the sword. And thank you for bringing this, Gary. This thing was not designed for dueling. This thing was designed to carry around and to draw it out, and when you met your enemy, in particular cavalry, they were all equipped with swords. They would swing this thing. You can look at how much it weighs, and it was not designed to mince with someone else with a sword and go back and forth like Hollywood have you think you know all about it. Or you would clash swords and bang around with people. It was designed to disable soldiers. Now, when you look at these weapons, look at them, because you have to have 2 arms and 2 hands to fire them. Now, if I come riding by on my horse, or if I come charging up because my horse is shot, and I want to make sure you don't shoot your rifle, I'm going to hit you. But where am I going to hit you? I'm going to hit you in the arm, right here, because I'm going to break your arm. And that's what this thing is designed for. It's designed to break bones. Or if I have to fall down and I have to swing at you from a lower position, I'm going to hit you in the leg. Because now you're down and you're hurting and you're scared and your bone is broken, and it's because I had this. That's what swords were designed for. That's what officers and that's what enlisted men who carried them were trained to do. They weren't trained to go dancing around and hacking on people and showing off how great a beautiful chrome-plated sword. They didn't have chrome then. But that's what a sword was designed for. Break bones. Ride by, hit him in the arm. Ride by, hit him in the head. Because it really hurts. And if you cut the head, what does it do? Well, you got 4 arteries going up to that head. What do? They bleed a lot. You get cut in the head and you're going to bleed a lot. You can't even see what you're doing. Well, by that time, they've wheeled around and they've got you. It's that simple. Simple training, terrible, terrible end results. So you understand that. Now, uniforms. And I apologize. It's my fault. I grabbed the wrong box. I don't have the Union soldiers here. But I do have the Confederates. Now, Confederates. What's the primary product coming out of the South worldwide? Comes out of southern United States. Cotton. And they turn around and they use cotton. Their uniforms are cotton. What is cotton? It's durable. It's washable. You can walk through a stream and it washes itself. And it's cool. And if you're in the South, where the Union armies were, you wanted something cool. Now, they didn't have a lot of uniforms right away, but within 6 months of the start of the war, most units were equipped with cotton uniforms on the Confederate side. And then you turn the page and you go, okay, but our guys had uniforms. Well, yeah, they sure did. And they were wool, and they were hot, and they were heavy, but they were durable. Those things never wore out. I mean, really. Soldiers would wear out long before their uniform would. But when you have a jacket made of wool, you wanted a cotton shirt, or a t-shirt, or something under it. Why? It itches. Oh, jeez. And you know, you got to remember, they didn't serve in northern Wisconsin in the middle of the winter, but it was designed for it. Where were most of the soldiers in the battles fought? First major battle that anyone from Wisconsin was in. No. It was not Bull Run. It was New Orleans. They took New Orleans. What's the temperature in New Orleans right now? Anyone have an idea? Today. I looked it up. This last week.
About 70.
70, that's at night, 98 degrees. Whoa! I got a wool jacket on, wool pants, and I'm walking around in 98 degree weather, carrying 100 pounds of equipment? Are you crazy? No, but that's what you got to do. That's what soldiers did. That's what Wisconsin soldiers did. Wool uniforms. Shoes. This is a real fun one. And I'm just going to take one of the infantry soldiers off, because these are actually replicas of that. And look at this and stop and think about it. That's the shoe. That's the size. Shoes are an important part of the Civil War. Major battle will be fought over shoes. Starts that way anyway. Shoes are not shoes like we have today. Do you have arch supports in any of your shoes? Better yet, who doesn't have arch support? These didn't have arch supports. These actually were what we'd call a unishoe. One size fits all. Right or left. It doesn't matter. What? No, you gotta have that round part on the inside. No, you don't. When you're a manufacturer and you're the only one making shoes, you make them as cheap as possible. So they're about 3 layers of leather, and they're covered over with leather, and they're laced up with laces, and that's it. Oh, by the way, there were leather laces too. One size fits all. If your foot was too small, sorry, this is what you got. You want this or your bare feet? Okay, I'll take the shoe. Now, later, they will add wooden heels. But the problem with wooden heels was they pounded through the shoe into the heel. Ow! You're going to walk on those nail heads? Because they didn't use nice flat-headed nails back then. They used square ones. That's what they had. I'm just going to pass this around. Take a look at the shoe. Take a look at the soldier. One size fits all. That's what it was. Right, left, didn't matter. You put it on your feet. It covered them up. That's all it did. Okay. Then, especially in the Union, you added in a coffee pot. By the way, they weren't plastic. Not for another 100-some years. They had a plate. They had a canteen. Many of them metal, most of them wood and rawhide. They had a backpack, leather, heavy, square in the Union. The Confederates didn't. They would steal them, off of dead bodies usually, but they just generally rolled everything up in a big, oh, did you think that was a blanket they had draped over their shoulders? Oh no, that's their half of the tent. They would unroll that, lay it out, pin it up, and you had a tent. Soldiers were very efficient. Cartridges, generally speaking, infantry carried 60 rounds, and then blanket, bedroll, and of course their tent. Reality check. You're carrying around 100 pounds of equipment. You're wearing wool uniforms if you're in the Union, Confederate cotton. But the Confederates, although they only got one uniform, many times they would take off with someone else, whether it was Confederate or Union, didn't matter, and so on. That's the equipment that is being used during the Civil War, some of it. They didn't have knives and forks to eat politely when they ate their supper. They had food called hardtack. Anyone ever had hardtack? Anyone know how you eat hardtack? Hardtack, the title kind of says it all. It was kind of roundish, squarish, about 3/4 of an inch thick, and you use the butt of your rifle to break it in half, and then slam it on a barrel or something hard to get the bugs out of it, and then soak it in coffee or water, because you can't chew it unless you soak it in water. It was a cornmeal. How many know what cornmeal is? You know what cornmeal is, don't you? It was a thick, heavy cornmeal biscuit that had been dried for months. Okay, doesn't that sound appetizing? Don't you really want to go out and eat something called hardtack? I don't think so. It would fracture your teeth. So you soak it. Water, in particular, coffee. Union had all kinds of coffee. Okay, now I want to talk a little bit about some unusual uniforms, and it leads me to some unusual units. Most of you saw the Louisiana Tigers. They were founded by a bunch of rich kids down in New Orleans, in the Louisiana area. Don't they look cute? Wow, wouldn't you like to run around in blue and white striped pants and a red blazer and know somebody has a weapon that can hit you at 300 yards? Oh yeah, sure I do. They experienced a New York unit that was trained extraordinarily well, and I apologize, I need to show you that. The New York unit had turbans on, they had flashy red bands. But unlike the Louisiana Tigers, the New York unit had to earn each part of their equipment. Before they finally got their turban, they had to pass 60-some tests of physical ability, using the bayonet, fighting off enemies, hand-to-hand combat, living for a week on nothing. They were extremely well trained. They fought in every major battle on the eastern part of the United States. The Army of the Potomac depended upon that unit to attack. When they attacked, that unit led. Suffered huge casualties. These guys in their fancy pants saw that and went, well, we can do that, they can do that. So they went out and got their fancy uniforms, not knowing what it would be like to go to war. In their very first battle, 1,000 Louisiana Tigers, nice name, led a Confederate army in its attack. The attack failed. 970 Louisiana Tigers were killed because they forgot to load their rifles. They did load their rifles, but by that time the Union soldiers saw them coming because they're wearing what again? Red caps, red shirts. Hello, what are you doing out there? And the Union thought it was funny. They slaughtered them. They were in one battle, and that's all. The Louisiana Tigers. Nice name. Why don't you pass that around and let people look at it? By all means, were in one battle, discontinued. Confederate leadership was so shocked at the losses, I mean 97% dead and wounded or captured. Barely 30 of them got back out of 1,000 men. They couldn't take those kind of losses. But they also were not trained. They were not drilled. They were not equipped the way they had to be. Whereas the New York unit had to earn every part of their unit, their uniform, where the New York unit had to do so many things. 6 months minimum training. Now, some questions. And by the way, this is not a flag, although some people would like to think that it is. All it is it a symbol of defiance. It was, by Confederate standards, their battle flag, but it's not a national flag. The stars and bars is their national flag. This was a battle flag. I have some questions for you. How many stars are on here? How many? 13? So who does it represent when only 11 states left the Union? What? 13 did! No, 13 didn't. What does it represent? Well, it represents the fact that Kentucky and Maryland said they were going to, but never did. So it's an inaccurate symbol. And they constantly wanted them to join. People from Kentucky would serve in other units, and in Maryland would serve in other units. But the flag was inaccurate. There's a couple things to learn. The Union would have many descriptions of their flag. They had stars on in different arrangements. But towards the end of the war, especially after the Battle of Gettysburg, the Union flag becomes standardized as we know it now. An interesting thing to remember, however, by presidential decree, no state in rebellion lost their star on the United States flag. In other words, even though Florida left the Union in succession, South Carolina left, Virginia left, their star remained on the United States flag. Lincoln said, and made it very clear, we're not taking that star off because it is a symbol of unity. And he meant it. And there was no discussion. It was a presidential decree, and that was it. It would inspire many things. Do you have any questions up to this point about equipment or in particular flags?
About the Confederate, what kind of rifles did they have?
Rifles, they had, much like the smooth bore. The unique things about the Confederate Army was because it was a lot of rural people, okay? They lived in the open. They were initially very good shots. They didn't need a lot of training. They, in fact, were some of the first snipers. Do you know who invented snipers or brought about snipers in the Union Army? Come on. You got to know what I'm leading up to. The first snipers were Wisconsin. Primarily, oh yes, primarily Norwegians. What? They were axe handlers! No, 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 no. Oh no, you missed the whole point of Norwegians in Wisconsin. Norwegians, as an ethnic group, were extremely practical people. And they knew that when they saw the rifles that had the rifle barrels from Pennsylvania, they wanted them. They knew that they'd been through battles and they'd seen what happens, and people get so close they stab you and they shoot you And I don't like that. I really have a problem with someone trying to shoot me. Those darn Norwegians were thinkers. They are the first unit to use green uniforms. What? No, they had blue and gray. Oh, no, they didn't. They had snipers that would sit with leather pouches on with 8 days rations in. And they would usually crawl up big trees and sit up there and wait for Confederate officers. And they would shoot them. And they were extremely good shots. That means they didn't miss. 500 yards was average for the snipers that were used during the Civil War on the Union side. They often bragged in diaries and letters home to their parents and family. At 500 yards, I can shoot a nickel out of someone's hand. Whoa. Now, nickels were a little bigger then. And the Confederates, they kind of buffed them up a little, but they were wooden. Yeah, that's where the idea of wooden nickels come from. And they would shoot them out of their hands. Confederate soldiers were always flipping them up like this. And that motion, you could see from 500 yards away, or at least they could. And they would shoot it in midair. And you know what the Confederate soldiers quickly learned? They don't want to go out there because somebody just shot my wooden nickel. Wow, that's crazy. And that's crazy good when you consider looking at that kind of weapon, when you consider that kind of distance. And they didn't have a lot of shots because in those days, those guns gave off a lot of smoke. Okay. Good question. Did I answer it for you? Okay. Confederates had pistols, Confederates had swords, Confederates had single-shot rifles. They wanted the Union shot, the rifles that could shoot more than one bullet, but didn't get very many because they just didn't give them up real easy. I want to talk about some major battles. That's the third point. The first one, and it's really kind of funny. Oh, wait, before we do that, did everybody get a chance to put their name in the bucket? Everyone got a chance? Did you put your name in? Okay, so guess what? You get to draw one name out. You got to draw one name out. Shake it up, move them around, draw a name out. And read it off. Yeah, you can't keep it a secret. Who? You? Oh, well, guess what? See, I'm one of these really, really weird, I'll say it, Civil War people. And back then, the most famous toys were lead toys. And I have lead molds. And Bob, you're the proud owner of a leaded cannon and a loader. He's yours.
Thank you.
You're welcome. I've got 3 other ones, so don't give up yet. Don't. It's yours. Now, major battles. Got to talk about one that will impact this country and the world. It starts in 1861 at the start of the war. The Union abandons Norfolk Harbor. They sink a ship. They literally burn it. And it sinks. They scuttle it. It's called the Merrimack. Okay? And the Confederates take Norfolk Harbor because it's in Virginia. And they raise it up. That's not an easy task. They build a wall around it, drain out all the water, and they go, whoa, cool ship, but it's shot. What are we going to do? Well, some great engineers in the South said, I know what we're going to do. We'll build a battleship. Well, what's a battleship? I have the faintest idea. I'm going to work it out. What they do is the walls of the hull of the ship, they drop it. They flatten the top, and they're 1 foot solid oak. Whew! That is thick. Now, before they put the flat top on, they go, we got to have something to power this thing because sails are not going to move this. So they put in one of the few steam engines in the South. It's old, it's worn out, but, you know, you do what you have to do. And it takes them almost a year from when they started to finish it, because they laid 3 inches thick, 3-inch thick armor plate on top of the oak. They put 10 huge cannons in this thing. And if that isn't enough, they put a 45-ton iron ram on it, on the bow, on the front. This thing weighs so much that when they let the water back in to where they've been working on it, it almost sinks. I mean, it's got 3-inch armor plate, it's got oak walls, it's got huge cannons in, this old steam engine, and they rechristened it the Virginia. This is a very small model of it. You can take a look at it. I want you to, so you get some idea about what it looks like, what its symbol is. Because on the other side of the Potomac, which is across from Norfolk Harbor, the Union is fully aware of what the Confederates are doing. And of all people, can you imagine? They have a contest to see who can design a ship that will be able to fight this thing, because it's almost finished. It's just that the South builds things very slowly. They have very poor industry. It takes forever to put the armor plate on, etc., etc. And they have, get this, a Swede. Ah, Swede? Oh my gosh! And he comes up with this radical new idea. And it's this little, tiny, tiny ship. The base is wood, but it's pine. Imagine that, white pine. Where have we heard that before? Oh, those Swedes from, eastern Wisconsin. He knew all about white pine. And he said, we're going to put 3 inches of armor plate on it. Because armor plate is good. Armor plate will stop any ordnance, any cannons can be fired. And I'm going to do this really unique thing. I'm not going to build a ship with 10, 15, or 20 of these big cannons because there's so much weight. He designs what is called a ball turret. It's round, it has 2 cannons in it, and it can rotate. Whoa. Traditional naval thinking was that, you have to pull your ship alongside, stare at the enemy, and fire all your cannons sinking. Well, the Swedish guy, he says, you're crazy, I'm not going to do that. This thing is so low to the water that the water almost comes up to the ball turret. It's within a foot. And it's meant to go low in the water. And so the ball turret rotates 360 degrees. They train and train and train, but here's the kicker. They build the ship in less than 3 months. From start, by the way, has anybody got an idea? To finish, okay, we're ready to fight. 3 months. Whoa, that is fast. Now the Virginia, April 1862, comes out. It's out of its harbor. Comes out because the Union is blockading the South. It's strangling the South. They can't get their cotton out to sell it, to get gold, to buy guns, to bring them back. And it's hurting the South. So they send out their best ship, man. This Virginia is tough. 45-ton ram on it. 10 of the biggest cannons you can imagine. They fired, picture this, 15-inch round, solid iron balls. Woo! These things flew at you and you didn't duck. You could just kiss it goodbye. It was over. Okay, we got 10 guns that can do this. Now the guys in the Monitor are training and they are scared out of their minds. You should read some of their diaries. They're just funny. They're going, we're in this little thing and he thinks we're going to take on that big ship down south. And I don't know if we want to do this because it's scary. I mean, I look out my porthole and it's the gun port, because they didn't have other ports, there was just nothing there. And I see water. The best description of the Monitor was from a Confederate lieutenant on board the Virginia. We looked through his spyglass, but I'm jumping ahead of myself, so I'm going to back up. One day, Virginia comes out. There are 3 wooden, big, 40-some guns on Union ships blockading the port. They take one on, boom, they just slaughter it. Set it ablaze. They take another one on, oh, by the way, it's called the Minnesota. No, not Vikings, just Minnesota. And they go, why waste bullets on this thing? Just ram it. Well, they ram it. Shatter the whole wall, it starts leaking, the captain runs it aground to save his ship. They go after the 3rd one, but it's getting dark because this ship moves so slow. It's got to have a lot of water underneath it, or it gets caught, and it got caught a couple times on sandbars. Imagine that, a river, sandbar. And so they go after the 3rd one, and the captain gets his ship out of the way, catches a few cannonballs in it, but it's not destroyed. And the day's getting over, so the people on the Virginia, they don't know anything about the Monitor yet. So what happens? They go back to port. Woohoo! Did we have a day? Oh, we sunk 2 ships. Tomorrow we're going to do the 3rd one, and it's over, and we win. So they don't even go out till 10 o'clock the next morning. They sleep in. Honest, they did. The captain doesn't even come. This dude, he is a semblance. This is the doll of him. And he doesn't come. He comes at 10 o'clock and he boards the ship and they get the boiler fired up, pass it around, take a look at the guy. Long-haired, gray, woolly. Gets on board 10 o'clock. 11:30, they got the boiler fired up. They head out. Figure, we'll finish that last ship off. It is over. It is done. We are so good. And from out behind that ship comes the Monitor. And the Confederate lieutenant up in the watch tower area looks through his glass and goes, what in the... Hey, come here, over here. What is that thing? It looks like a cheese box on a raft. What is it? And then they fire both of their cannons. And suddenly he realizes what it is. It's the Union's answer. He says, get the sailors ready. We're gonna squash that little thing. And you have to remember now, this is kind of a reenactment of how fast the Virginia would move. It would kind of go like this. And that's full speed. On the other hand, the Monitor does 28 miles an hour. Okay, guys, whoop, whoop, over here. Oh, yeah, hey, you fatso, over here, back behind you. Hi, how are ya? They're going crazy. Because the captain would give an order, forward gun, shoot. By the time the order got to the guys up front, the Monitor's over here. Oh, what are we shooting at? Okay, on the starboard side, open up, prepare to push your cannons out. By the time they got the cannons out, where's the Monitor? Yep, he's not on the starboard side. He's over on the other side. And he's shooting the whole time. And he's hitting the Virginia. This is our biggest ship. We didn't have any problem yesterday. Now we got this little thing out here shooting at us. How dare you? But now you got to go back to the construction of the Virginia. Remember, it was 1 foot thick solid oak walls. And it's 3 inches of armor plate.
Now you've got a 15-inch cannonball coming at 1,029 feet a second, boom! And it's noisy, but has anyone ever hit a piece of metal on wood? What happens to the wood? It shatters. It splinters. Did you ever get oak slivers? Did you ever have them flying through the air, hurting people, cutting people? That's what's happening inside the Virginia. Oh, shark, flying all over the place. Sailors are ducking. They're going, that little guy is hurting us. Captain, do something about it. Ramming speed. Ramming speed was 3 miles an hour. 3 miles an hour? The guy out there is doing 28 miles an hour and I'm going to go 3 miles an hour and I'm going to hit him? You gotta be kidding. Here we go. Okay, ramming speed. Okay, I'm tired. Oh, yeah. And that old boiler. Have a heavy ship. It took him 45 minutes to turn that far. You gotta be kidding. The Monitor is 6 times around, shooting the whole time. The battle goes on for nearly 4.5 hours. Long about 3:30, 4 o'clock in the afternoon, the Monitor's crew is getting really worried because they've only been fired at 6 times by the Virginia, and they missed them. And they've only got 20 shells left. 20 of those big 15-inch solid iron balls. And they haven't sunk it, but they've sure scared them to death. They don't know it, but they have. Captain says, keep firing. Okay, we'll keep firing. Now, the Virginia gets really ticked off and just keeps trucking at it and trucking at it. They're moving, but they're trucking at it. And they're trucking at it. They're going to get them this time. Oh, I forgot to tell you, when they rammed the Minnesota, they lost that 45-ton ram. It was sticking in the ship when they backed away, the nails broke. And he goes, oh, we don't have the ram anymore, do we? Nope, you don't. Well, look, fire the cannons. So they fired. Swung it around and fired 4 cannons. Boom, 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 boom. And they hit the Monitor. Now, the big fear of the Swedish designer, of the men on board the Monitor, was they would hit our ship and tear the ball turret off. And then, what have we got? Nothing. Well, they hit it. They didn't tear it off, but there was a consequence. Now, how many have ever rung a bell? Anybody ring a bell? Okay, did you ever stick your head inside that bell when you're ringing it? Try and imagine what it was like inside, yes, an iron ball turret, and people are hitting it with 15-inch solid iron balls. It's just like sticking your head inside a bell and having somebody outside with a 20-pound sledge going, oh, you know, that really is not nice. I don't think I'll ever do that again. And they're walking around. Tragically, and I mean this sincerely, the medical examiner of the crew of the Monitor after the battle found 95% of them were nearly stone deaf. And he said, what did you do? What, Captain, what did you do to these men? And he kept saying, I don't know. What was the matter with you? It's just really, things are buzzing in my head. They were deaf because they were getting hit with these huge iron balls. And the Confederates were mad now. And they had gotten the Monitor into shallow water, and they were in the deep water, and the Monitor couldn't come out, and they were hitting it and hitting it and hitting it and doing nothing to it. They were denting it. By 5 o'clock, they said, what's going on? We're out of bullets on the Monitor. We have no more cannonballs. And one of the lieutenants running one of the 2 brand new steam engines down below comes up and has to yell at the captain, gee, I wonder why, and say, I know where there's bullets. I know where there's cannonballs. Well, where are they? The Confederates shot at him, hit him,
and they're laying on the deck. So the captain of the Gospel, captain of the Monitor, moves off. The Virginia, which has exhausted its supply because it didn't have quite as many shells, they have a little lip alongside the ship where when the Monitor shells hit, they would roll down and they'd sit there. The ships separate for an hour. They each collect the cannonballs off of the decks of their ships, put them back inside, and yes, go after each other again. The Union firing Confederate cannonballs at a Confederate ship, the Confederates firing Union shells at a Union ship. Well, that process didn't work real well because the Confederates kept missing and they'd go in the water. And the Union, they kept hitting them, and the only thing they ever did was tear off the smokestack and damage, yes, damage some of the iron plate on the outside. What they didn't know was what they were doing on the inside. They shattered that oak. 1 foot thick oak. Shards all over the place. Sailors, over half of the Virginia's crew had lost eyes and stab wounds, and they were bleeding. The captain didn't know what to do. Besides, they were moving so fast. We're ramming speed, ramming speed. That's as fast as we can go. Yes, it is. And the engine doesn't like it. The sun was setting. The Battle of Hampton Roads ended. Nobody won, but the Confederate ship would never fight again. Union Army later would attack in that area, and the Confederates blew the ship up. The Monitor, which we have just discovered a few years ago, National Geographic did a really neat special on it, was sunk in a storm off of North Carolina, where it was ordered to go to Florida to seize contraband, cotton, and so on. But it was sunk because it was so low, and waves, yes, waves of up to 3 feet, imagine that, sunk it. They washed over the exhaust ports and the air vents and filled the ship with water, sent it down. They would improve that design, thank you very much, but it's the first battle of iron ships. Tremendous battle. Outstanding battle. Scary battle. Especially if you were in the ball turret of the Monitor, and I'm not kidding you, they were deaf. All you have to do is stick your head in the bell sometime and have somebody ring it. You'll know what I mean. The other battle I want to talk about is Gettysburg. Now everybody thinks they know about Gettysburg, but they don't know about Gettysburg. There's a lot of stuff we don't know. There was a rumor when I took history classes that Gettysburg started over shoes. And guess what? It did. Gettysburg, Pennsylvania had 23 shoe factories. And if you're a Confederate in an army of 75,000 of the toughest, nastiest, most successful soldiers in the entire world at the time, they just came off 7 straight victories, beating the stinkers out of Union armies way larger. But they were missing one important thing, and that is they didn't have any shoes. Now, back then they didn't have interstates and they didn't have blacktop roads. They walked on, yes, gravel and dirt roads. Your feet got kind of tough, but they could only get so tough. And when the lead units of Lee's army, who have invaded the North and are sweeping through, and they're stealing everything, man, they find the Union is not, they can't imagine the good stuff they got. You know, they had machines that could harvest whole fields. They have plows with more than one bottom. They have horses, and they come on this sign that says, "Welcome to Gettysburg, Pennsylvania, shoe capital of the world." 23 shoe factories. Now, if you're walking around barefooted and have been for 2 years, would you go there? You're darn right. So would I. And they did. Lee did not want them to go there. He said, "Don't go down there. It's in a valley. We want to stay up here on the ridges." Didn't happen. They went down into Gettysburg. And the very first thing they meet is about 1,500 Union cavalry with those rapid fire rifles, and they stop them cold. And they have to regroup and get all their reinforcements. Takes them another day to take Gettysburg, the city of Gettysburg. Meanwhile, the general, the new general, in charge of the Union Army, has used railroads to bring 105,000 men and encircle Gettysburg on 3 sides, and they're in the top of the ridges and the bluffs. And they go, "Hey, you, with the shoes on, we're on top of the hill, come and get us." Well, these are tough Confederate soldiers, and they're cocky. They have just come 6 straight victories. They can't be defeated. We'll beat you anytime, anywhere. And sure enough, they try. They attack at Little Round Top. And if you know anything, how many have ever seen Gettysburg battlefield? Whoa, some kind of view from the top, isn't it?
Yeah.
Wouldn't you like to be at the top? If you're going to fight a war, I'd like to be at the top, not on the bottom. And remember, it's fought June 30th, July 1st, July 2nd, and the final battle on July 3rd. Now, what's the weather like during then?
Very hot.
Huh.
Hot.
Humid? Is it
Yes,
humid?
yes.
Oh yeah! And soldiers would line up, and yes, they attacked. The Confederates attacked uphill all day long. And they were slaughtered. The Union soldiers said, "You are not going to knock off our army. We're sick and tired of you beating us." And they did not beat them on the first day, because they had to go uphill. And those guys were up front, and they were dug in, and they weren't moving them. It's actually the second day of the battle, but it's the first day of the major part of the battle. The other day, Lee goes around the other side. He loses 12,000 men on the second day. He loses 11,000 more on the third day. On the fourth day, July 3rd, he puts his best units, absolutely toughest soldiers. He gets his best engineer, artillery officer. Here's a replica of him. He mounts 385 cannons. And he said, "Blow them out of the middle. I'm sending my best soldiers right up the middle, and I am going to break the Union line, and I'm going to get in behind them, and I'm going straight to Washington." Trouble is, you have to march across a long, open field. Take it, look it, pass it around. And the young colonel, nice guy, really wanted to fire his cannons. Which, by the way, you have to draw another name now because I'm talking about cannons. Yes, draw another name. Who? Well, you got to open it.
June Dutcher.
Well, where's June? Well, guess what, June? You're the proud owner of another cannon. And yes, it's lead, it's heavy. Okay. These cannons are not smokeless. Yeah, how many have ever seen one of these cannons fired? They smoke a lot, don't they? Imagine 385 of them concentrated firing. They create so much smoke that the officer in charge can't see what he's hitting. And if you've ever fired one of these things, you have to know what you hit the first time to make adjustments. Besides, when these cannons fire, they don't just sit still. They jump back. And so you got to push them back up here, reload them, and fire them again. And you got to know where you're shooting, and all this smoke is out there. If you've ever seen the movie Gettysburg, it gives you a little bit of an image because it's just smoky. And the Union is sitting on the other side of a very large wall, with a whole lot of troops there, hiding behind a wall going, okay, shoot at us, we'll get our cannons up and we'll shoot back. And there was one thing the Union had a lot of, and that is equipment. You could blow up all their cannons and they would have more the next day. It didn't matter. They had hundreds of factories producing artillery. The South had 3. Okay, there's an artillery duel going on. Confederate colonel in charge says, if I leave my cannons out here much longer, we're going to lose some of these cannons. And sure enough, they start blowing them up. Yeah, they're blowing up the Union ones, but they bring up new ones all the time. Then they start hitting behind the Confederate cannons, and they blow up their ammunition carriers, their caissons. And he says, get them back further. We can't lose those shells because we don't have any more. So it takes these guys a long time to run back, get one shell, run all the way up. Somebody's adjusting the cannons and going, I think this is where we should shoot, but I can't see because there's smoke in the way. And they were missing the wall. They were missing the Union soldiers. And then Lee orders his fateful charge. And it isn't a charge like you would think. These are the most disciplined, hardcore Confederate soldiers there are. When someone says get in line, they get in line. When someone says walk, they walk. And it doesn't matter if people are shooting at them or not, they do it. They are tough. They're mean, they're nasty, and they are here to win. And they walk across a field and they are butchered. Of the 15,000+ Confederates who will attack the Union that day, and they nearly get through the Union line, but not quite. Over 12,000 will die. Stop and think about that for percentages. Whoa, 80% dead? Yes. And they nearly break through the lines. Now, a lot has been made out of the Minnesota unit that stopped the Confederates. What the historian who said that forgot was 2 Wisconsin units were right alongside that Minnesota unit, and they were almost totally destroyed in that Confederate charge. And the Minnesota unit came up and stopped them, yes. But they forgot that there were 2 Wisconsin units who expired. I mean, they were all killed. They slowed the Confederates down so much at the wall that by the time the Minnesota unit came up, they broke the Confederate charge. They killed the last general, and the Confederates said, there's nobody left. And they barely carried their wounded, the few left, back. Less than 3,000 would survive out of 15. It was a massacre, a massive proportion. And the Confederacy could never replace these soldiers. Now you look on your outline and you're going to see that 50,000 Union soldiers will die in this battle. Within less than 3 months, the Union has replaced these soldiers. The Confederacy will not replace their soldiers. The best they will ever come up with is about 7,000 more. And their army will sit at about 50,000 men. And in fact, in coming battles, they will number as low as 40,000 when they Lee finally surrenders. Never again are they have an army of 75,000. Gettysburg is extremely important. There's some interesting things that happen at Gettysburg. Not just the turning point, but they dedicate a cemetery to the thousands of troops. And do you know who they invite to speak at the cemetery? Who?
Stephen Douglas.
Yeah, Stephen Douglas. They don't invite the President of the United States. Now, it's not because the area of Pennsylvania that Gettysburg is in is all Democrats, although it was. It's because the governor of Pennsylvania was a Democrat, and he told the people organizing the cemetery celebration, you're not inviting the president, I'm going to be the head speaker. I have this inspired speech, and I am going to tell everyone about Pennsylvania. Oh my gosh. His speech went on for 2.5 hours in the November sun and cold. Wow. Over 400 news reporters were falling asleep. This governor of Pennsylvania, he didn't talk in anything but, and I'm going to give you an experience of this one, he talked in a monotone voice. Do you know what that is?
Yeah.
Okay, I'm going to give you an example. This is how he spoke. Okay, I'm really excited about this topic. And I'm going to tell you about Pennsylvania. And Pennsylvania is a wonderful state who did all these great things for 2.5 hours? Well, the night before, somebody slipped and told Lincoln, you should get up here. Because we've heard this governor speak before, and if he gets up there, he is going to bore these people to death. So Lincoln, President of the United States, Abraham Lincoln, gets on a train, runs up there, and halfway up there he goes, I don't have a speech. You guys got anything to write a speech on? He gets an old brown paper, what we would call sack, and he writes out this speech. And it starts out, 407 years ago. You got it! It's called the Gettysburg Address. Not enough kids learn it.
That's right.
Not enough kids, not just memorize it. I said learn it. There's a difference. We can all know words, but when you know what they mean. 407 years ago, our fathers brought forth on this continent a new nation. Nobody else has a nation like ours. That's what it means. And it goes on. And he describes how people aren't going to remember this, but I'm going to say it anyway. How these guys gave the last bit of their lives for this country, that this union would be preserved. And he said they're going to little note nor long remember any of this. Boy, was he wrong. How many had to memorize it in history class? Probably in 5th grade. Yeah, I know. I made my students do it too, but we learn. And that's the critical part. You learn what the words meant. Not just a bunch of words that I got through and I got my A and I'm done. Because every week was a little more part, just a little bit more and a little bit more. It's how you teach, how we should teach. Lincoln didn't realize until 2 days afterwards he got back to Washington, and on the front page of every newspaper they could get was the Gettysburg Address, verbatim. Because, one, I think, that the reporters were so bored with the governor of Pennsylvania's speech, they couldn't write it all down, and Lincoln's was pretty simple. It took him about 5 minutes at the most, and it said a lot. Battle of Gettysburg, huge turning point. Lee is defeated. The same day Vicksburg falls, the Confederacy is on a downward spiral, and this war is going to come to an end. He will later hire Ulysses S. Grant, who is a pretty good general when he's not drunk, and yeah, he was drunk. And he's a really good soldier if he would just not listen to his subordinates. Because, and you mentioned Burnsides, didn't you, Gary? And the reason that we call those things sideburns was because he wore his down to here. He wasn't too bad towards the end of the war, but he was the biggest screw up before that, because he made the mistake Grant would make. He listened to his subordinates. His subordinates told him in 1862 to attack Fredericksburg. He did. The Confederates moved out of the town and they moved up what is called St. Mary's Height. 7 months before the Battle of Gettysburg, the Confederates were sitting 350 feet higher than the Union Army, behind 18-inch thick rock walls. And they could hit everything down below them, and they did. the Union would lose 10,000 of its best soldiers trying to attack that wall. They never did breach it, and Burnside's was fired 2 days later. But he got better. Grant listened to Burnside's. When he did, he won battle. Grant was a tough soldier. The Civil War was coming to an end under Grant. Now, the last part, I think one of the most important, and it's because, and I will admit that I don't think our teachers are well trained enough in Wisconsin history to teach it with confidence. And we as historical societies need to approach them and make sure that our state requires Wisconsin history. Because the last point in this discussion is Wisconsin history. Now, some of you looked at the back page and they went, whoa, you're kidding me. We had 4 governors? Whoa. Did you know that? Nope. And Alexander Randall was a good governor, but he was nothing really important other than he worked with Lincoln and he got the state of Wisconsin ready. He passed some rules that said Norwegians are going to serve with Norwegians. Germans are going to serve with Germans. Now, why would that help Army units? Why do you think? Speak the same language. You ever try and get orders in Norwegian? How many of you got orders in German? Hey, you got to remember, they still spoke German and Norwegian. Yes. Basic rules, basic organization. You got voted out of office, and Lewis Harvey comes in, and Lewis Harvey will only serve 100 days in office, but was a dynamic governor. He was all over the state of Wisconsin, getting units together, encouraging people on the home front. He would travel down south after the Battle of Shiloh to comfort, yes, comfort Wisconsin soldiers who had served in that battle. He was up and down the Tennessee River supporting his soldiers. And on the 100th day, you got it, folks, here it comes. He went, met with soldiers in the morning, soaked some hardtack, according to his own diary. He didn't write it, he had his secretary do it. And then he was getting on board the steamship, and he slipped. And he fell into the Tennessee River and he drowned. But because of his dynamic approach to being governor, he traveled all over. Most governors just sat in the Capitol and went, I'm the governor. He was all over the place. Okay? He would be called, in the newspapers, the 100-day wonder. That's where the term comes from. 100-day wonder. Now, World War II would see that term used again, but he's the first one. Because he was dynamic, he was out there, he was working with everyone, he was encouraging them. And his lieutenant governor, Edward Selman, takes over after him. And Edward, he's a sit-at-home governor, but he had to be. Because Wisconsin took huge losses. Huge losses. Whole units would vanish. And he set up care for the widows and the orphans. He created, yes, orphanages, but they were nice orphanages, not like you heard through Hollywood, where they beat the kids and stuffed them in the basement and buried them in the back of in the backyard of the outhouses. He treated Wisconsin soldiers' families like he wanted, in his words, like he wanted to be treated if he were to die. And he said, I know a little bit about that because my friend, your ex-governor, was my friend. And I treat his family the way I want my family to be treated. And he was all over the state of Wisconsin, raising money, making sure they had food, housing, and so on. And he would spend all the way through 1864 doing just that. And he had problems equipping the soldiers and maintaining their units And then he got hit in 1863, right after the Battle of Gettysburg, with, ooh, look at that nasty word, the draft, where everyone had to serve. Now, on the East Coast, it was left up to the states, and the states, many of them, well, they didn't want all the rich kids to serve in the Army. So they passed rules that said for $300 you can buy out or have someone else serve, because the government needs the money and, you know, and so on. He didn't let that happen in Wisconsin. He said, when you're drafted, you go, period. We'll take care of your families. The soldiers trusted him. And you're going to notice later on how many soldiers served from Wisconsin. Whoa! Look at the numbers. Under B, 91,327 soldiers from Wisconsin serve in the Civil War. 56 regiments. A regiment is 1,000 men. And when 10 get killed, you send 10 more to replace them. And he made sure that happened. And he supported the troops, and he made sure the mandates worked in Wisconsin. As examples, 25th Regiment, organized in La Crosse, organized 1862. They were already had raised 25 regiments, 25,000 troops. There were 1,444 who actually served in the unit, 422 who died, 20 deserted, yes, some did do that. 65 were transferred to another unit, 165 were discharged. To get discharged, you could be too sick, you could have suffered an injury, amputation, and so on. And then 722 of that final regiment were mustered out in 1865. That's just one example of the 25th Regiment. Remember, there were 56 regiments in Wisconsin. Some of the highest numbers of regiments would come from Wisconsin. Even though the population was nowhere near New York or Ohio or Pennsylvania, etc., you got drafted, you served. And they were very proud of that. And remember, they were ethnically organized. Now, I got two stories to tell. And one kind of blends into the other one. In 1862, Wisconsin units, first units, went with the Army, and they were to capture New Orleans. And there were three in particular, Wisconsin regiments, the 3rd, 5th, and 7th. And they were good soldiers. They were led by great colonels. And their colonels, after they captured New Orleans, and they marched north of New Orleans, and they were expanding their circle around Louisiana, they run into plantation after plantation. And there are a lot of slaves on these plantations. And the slaves are going like, whoa, who are you? And what are you doing here? Because they're ignorant. They don't read, they don't write, they don't know anything about it. They just know that these soldiers are coming around saying, you're free. And that's what the soldiers did. They said, we came here to free you. Because unlike many units, Wisconsin was not afraid ever to say, you're free. Now I'm going to back up just a couple steps. Remember we said 2 groups in Wisconsin, right? Ethnic groups. What were they? German, Norwegian. They came from the old country. In the old country, you couldn't own land because some rich dude lived up on the hill, owned everything. But in America, you could own whatever you wanted to. You had to pay for it, but you could own it. And they liked that. And they cut up a living. They were lumberjacks, they were artisans, they were riverboat people, they were farmers, oh yes. Even poor farmers, they were still farmers. They were rich. Farmland in this state. And the real kicker was, they went down south to free. Now you're going, well, where did they ever hear about freeing slaves? I mean, it just didn't happen that quick. In Wisconsin, and I'll just use the city of Racine as an example. In Racine, Wisconsin, there were more abolitionist newspapers than in the city of Boston, Massachusetts. They published more papers, they wrote more articles, they controlled the news that the people of Wisconsin read. And they sent out their newspapers everywhere. Racine, Wisconsin, Milwaukee, Wisconsin will be, quote, hotbeds that Confederates prior to the war, Southern people hunting down slaves, did not want to go into. Because they would get tarred and feathered and chased out if they tried to grab a slave or an ex-slave. Because in Wisconsin, you were free to do what you wanted to do when you wanted to do it. Because that's what their rules were for themselves. And they weren't going to let someone else beat someone up, starve them, kill them, hang them, brand them, do the horrible things that they did to slaves. Wisconsin will be one of the major stepping off points for what is called the Underground Railroad. They had thousands of blacks coming to Wisconsin and being shipped across, oh yeah, the Great Lakes into what's that country again? Canada, where millions of blacks still live today, and they came from the South. Their ancestors did. Back to New Orleans. 3 regiments, Wisconsin troops. They're telling the blacks, you're free. Oh, but the general in charge doesn't like that, and he's not from Wisconsin. And he sends a message to one colonel in charge of the 5th Regiment, and he said, I understand that you are telling these slaves they're free. Don't do that anymore. The colonel doesn't answer. A couple days later, he's hearing the same stories again. He goes, and he's going to meet with that colonel. He's going to tell him personally, and he's going to bring 6 of his biggest, strongest soldiers with him to make sure that colonel knows who's the boss. Okay? Colonel gets wind of it. Well, this general comes riding up on his big white horse. 5 of the biggest, strongest guys he can muster riding right behind him. They get off their horses. They march into the colonel's tent at 6 a.m. The colonel's still sleeping, but he knew he was coming. And he goes, yes, oh, General, what can I do for you? I hear you're telling these slaves they are free. You get your soldiers up, you get those slaves out of your camp, and you get them back to their owners. Well, sir, we don't believe that in Wisconsin. I read this from his own diary. Oh, I don't care what you believe. I'm the general. You're the colonel. I'm in charge. Get him back. No. What? I said no. What do you mean no? He said, no is no. I said no, we're not going to do it. Calls his 5 big, strong soldiers in. He said, see those men? They will make you. Said I yawned in his own diary. And he said, oh, by the way, General, and he threw open the back side of his tent. There's 800 Wisconsin soldiers said, we're not going to do that. And they were all awake, and they were all standing with their rifles and their bayonets attached, and they had surrounded the colonel's tent, and they said, they're not going back, are they? Well, the general wasn't so stupid as to know that 5 guys and him, surrounded by over 800 nasty-looking Norwegians and Germans, and they spoke both languages, and they probably discussed their ancestry a lot, too. Okay, but I'll see you tomorrow, and you will do what I tell you. Okay, fine. Goodbye, General. Didn't salute him. That was right in his diary. The general came back. Took him 2 days. He surrounded the entire Wisconsin 5th with 8 regiments of New York and some from New England soldiers. And he said, now you're surrounded. The colonel said, why? I
want you to send those slaves. They said, what slaves? Those slaves that were coming into your camp, you were feeding them, and you were telling them they were free, I want you to send them back. And he goes, oh, I'm sorry, General, there's no, you want to go on my camp? Look, 1,800 slaves who were there 2 days ago are gone. There is no record of those 1,800 slaves getting on any railroads, because they didn't have any that time, and going anywhere. However, as the colonel will point out, the general does fire them, by the way. There were about 40 ships that left New Orleans the night before. No one knows what they were carrying. Their destination was, of all places, Wisconsin. Of all places, there is records of over 1,800 people arriving in Wisconsin, in particular at Racine and Milwaukee. And these people bought tickets, which they didn't pay any money for because they didn't have any, for Canada. And these people went to Canada and no one stopped them. 3 days after the colonel was fired down in New Orleans. And the colonel received many letters after the war saying thank you. But nobody knows anything about it. Oh, by the way, the colonel was fired. He was replaced with a New York colonel who didn't get along very well because he didn't understand German or Norwegian. And his unit would later play no role, pretty much kind of did guard duty in New Orleans. But the colonel, after he was fired, took a ship back to New York, took 3 weeks, went back to Wisconsin, by the Great Lakes, got together another regiment. Oh, did I say that was the Lacrosse 25th? And served in 17 battles. He never crossed swords with that general again because he wasn't in the same army. But he finished the war alive and well, and brags to the very dying day he was responsible for over 40,000 non-combatants going to Canada. Gee, I wonder what origin they were. Probably not Norwegian or German. True story. Comes right out of his diary. You need to understand, our students need to understand, people need to understand that Wisconsin was an abolitionist state. They didn't have slaves, they didn't want slaves, and they didn't want anyone else to have it, and they were very, very strong in that belief. They would have more newspapers that were, quote, abolitionist newspapers. They supported their troops, and they told them when they went off, free the slaves. Even though the first part of the war was not about freeing the slaves, it was just about keeping the Union together, they went down to free the slaves. When the Emancipation Proclamation is signed, they're already freeing the slaves. There are reports about Wisconsin units that are alongside of Kentucky units, and the Kentucky unit soldiers lay down their rifles and go home because they just freed the slaves, and I don't know what I'm going to do now. And the Wisconsin soldiers laughed at them and embarrassed them. But you have to remember, they didn't speak that much English, so the Kentuckians didn't really know what they were saying. They just knew it was a foreign language, and they were laughing a lot.
Because it was German and Norwegian. One last fact that I want to share with you about Wisconsin, and that is in Racine, Wisconsin, they heard about this unit called the 54th Massachusetts. It was a really brave, totally black unit that was being brought together. Racine said, you know what? We got over 15,000 blacks who live in Racine as free men. Think we should start a regiment with them? They did. They trained them, and they were actually ready to fight before the Massachusetts 54. But the general didn't want them. Wisconsin unit would go into battle and would serve valiantly as the 2nd Military Regiment in combat, totally composed of black soldiers. They were free men, and when the draft came by, they were already in uniform.
And they served valid. Congratulations from Congress and the state of Wisconsin. And very few, if anyone knows, that we even had a black regiment. But we did. And they didn't speak Norwegian or German. What's unique about them is their officers were black. What? Unheard of back then. You liberals in Wisconsin, I can't believe you! You got blacks in charge of your army. Well, it was a black regiment. Why not? Thank you very much. If you ever want to read an interesting book, Across 5 Aprils by Irene Hunt. It's an outstanding book. Order it. It gives you a great deal of experience and knowledge about what the Civil War was like when you compare families, fighting families, and Across 5 Aprils. It's a really, really good book. I encourage you all to come up, look at everything I have here, look at the stuff on the other tables. I'm sorry I talked way too long, and I apologize for that. But, hey, that's fine.
Very good.
All right, thank you.
Thank you, Bob. There's lunch back there.